Hi, and welcome to Sleepy History. If you're listening to this at night, I hope it helps you unwind. Please like and subscribe, it means so much to me. Where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it? It's so nice to think that wherever we are, we're sharing this moment together. The first light of morning touched the rooftops of the village with a pale gold, catching on the frost that clung to the thatched eaves and turning the whole hamlet into a soft shimmer of silver and straw. A curl of smoke rose from the chimney of the baker's cottage, thin and steady, warming the cool air with the scent of ash and rising dough. The village was small, tucked along the edge of a forest and beside a slow, winding stream. A dirt path ran between the houses, its ruts filled with dew. Chickens stirred beneath wooden coops, and in the distance, a rooster called once, then again, before falling silent. There was no rush, only the slow unfolding of another ordinary day. Inside a cottage near the edge of the fields, a woman stirred the hearth embers with a stick, coaxing them gently to life. She added dry twigs, then a log, which crackled faintly as it caught. Her husband pulled on his woolen tunic and stepped outside, rubbing his hands together and breathing the cool morning air. The door creaked behind him, soft and worn on its hinges. In the fields beyond the village, mist still clung to the low places, drifting slowly as the sun rose higher. Sheep grazed quietly among the heather, their breath steaming in the morning light. A boy with a staff leaned against a fence, watching them, his cloak wrapped around him. From the woods, the sound of distant birdsong echoed faintly, carried on the still air. A stream trickled past the mill, its water wheel creaking softly as it turned. Moss grew along the stones, and frogs nestled beneath the reeds. A woman stooped beside the water, filling a wooden pail and watching the ripples spread outward in slow, quiet circles. In the centre of the village, the market square remained still, its carts and barrels waiting for the day to begin. A cat stretched beside the baker's doorstep, then returned to its spot by the warm stone wall. No one hurried, no one shouted. Everything began in its own time. And above it all, the sky brightened slowly. Clouds thinned. The scent of fresh bread began to drift from the chimney once more. The village, old and weathered, wrapped in its thatch and timber, welcomed the sun without ceremony. It was just another morning, but within the quiet shuffle of feet on earth, the gentle hiss of the fire, and the calm breath of livestock and people alike, there was peace. A peace born not of stillness alone, but of rhythm. Of days lived one after another, each softly folded into the next. By mid-morning, the village green had awakened with gentle motion. It was not a large space, but it lay at the heart of the hamlet, bordered by cottages and low stone walls, softened by creeping time. A few goats grazed calmly near the edge, tethered loosely to wooden stakes, their bells ringing softly with each quiet step. Children wandered barefoot over the grass, their tunics a little too big, their laughter soft and fleeting like bird song. They chased one another past the well, where a woman in a blue linen apron drew up the heavy bucket with both hands. The water inside caught the sunlight, shimmering silver for a moment before being poured into her clay jug. A short distance away, the village carpenter sat beneath a shaded lean-to. His work table, made from a single thick plank, held a half-finished stool and a scattering of wood shavings. He smoothed the legs with a bit of sanded stone, humming lowly. A small robin landed nearby, watching him curiously from the fence post. The blacksmith's shop stood at the edge of the green, its forge quiet for now, though the scent of iron still lingered in the air. The anvil glinted in a shaft of light. A boy swept the dirt floor, raising little clouds of dust that sparkled in the sunlight. Behind the smithy, a row of woven baskets sat stacked beside the cooper's hut. The lid of one lifted as a tabby cat emerged, blinking sleepily. It stretched and padded away toward the bakery, tail flicking lazily. On the far side of the green, near a wall where elderflowers bloomed, a few older villagers sat on a bench worn smooth by years of use. They watched the morning pass without hurry, their hands resting on canes or folded in their laps. One of them slowly peeled an apple, the curl of skin falling to the ground in a perfect spiral. The green was never noisy. It lived instead in small movements, the scuff of a heel, the thump of a bucket, the creak of old timber shifting in the sun. Every part of it held something familiar, a rhythm of life that hadn't changed in years, perhaps decades. Even the dogs, stretched out in patches of shade, seemed to know the pace of the place. They watched the children, the goats, the carpenter, but did not move unless called. Their ears flicked gently now and then, keeping time with the wind, and all around the green, the village exhaled quietly. Windows opened. Loaves cooled on wooden trays. Chickens pecked in soft earth. Another hour passed, folded neatly into the day, as steady as the turning of the seasons. Near the eastern edge of the green stood the village bakery, its roof low and heavy with moss, its walls a patchwork of timber and whitewashed plaster. The scent that wafted from within was rich and warm, of flour and fire, yeast and honey. It was the quiet heart of many mornings, where comfort rose slowly in the heat of the oven. Inside, Brother Ralph, the baker, moved with ease around the long wooden table. His hands were dusted with flour, his sleeves rolled past the elbow. He worked silently, folding dough with steady, practiced motions. The only sounds were the gentle thump of palms against the surface, the soft hiss of embers in the brick oven, and the occasional pop of a settling log. Dozens of round loaves rested on cloth-covered trays. Some were simple, dark with rye. Others had been braided, dusted with seeds, or marked with a small cross. Ralph checked each one with a finger, pressing gently, then lifting the tray and sliding it into the heat. He did not rush. The bread would rise as it pleased, in its own time. Beside the hearth, a pot of barley porridge simmered slowly. It was stirred now and then with a wooden spoon, releasing the faint scent of apples, and a single clove dropped in for flavour. A kettle hung above the coals, its lid gently rattling with each lazy bubble of steam. Through the small window, sunlight streamed across shelves lined with linen-wrapped loaves. A small jar of honey rested near the sill, next to a bowl of early pears. Bees buzzed softly outside, nosing against the wooden shutters. Ralph paused to wipe his brow, then stepped outside to collect kindling. He nodded to a child passing with a milk pail and smiled faintly as the cat from the green trotted in, tail held high and curled near the hearth's warmth. He returned to the dough, which had now risen high and soft. With a wooden blade, he scored the tops gently, then slid the final tray into the glowing oven. The heat kissed his cheeks, and the air grew thicker with that ancient, soothing scent. Fresh bread, born of earth, water, and time. The village would come soon, bringing cloth-wrapped coins or eggs for barter. But for now, the bakery was quiet. The fire glowed softly, the loaves crackled as they baked, and the morning sun touched everything inside with a golden, sleepy light. And in that moment, nothing needed to change. The hearth was full, the bread was rising. The world, at least here, was at peace. Down a narrow lane lined with elderberry bushes and smooth-worn stone stood the weaver's shed, tucked neatly behind a cottage with a thatched roof that sagged slightly in the middle. The door hung open with a soft creak, letting in the fresh midday air and the distant murmur of village sounds. Laughter, footsteps, the occasional bleat of a goat. Inside, shafts of sunlight poured through the high, dust-filmed window and fell upon a great wooden loom. Its beams were thick and dark with age, its threads strung taut like a quiet harp. The smell of wool, lavender, and oak drifted through the air, calming and familiar. Mistress Elswaith sat on a low stool beside the loom, her fingers moving slowly through a basket of dyed yarns. She chose a deep green strand, soft and even, then began to weave it into the fabric growing steadily before her. Her hands moved with the rhythm of long habit, over, under, pull, beat. The shuttle whispered gently with each pass. Spools of thread lined the shelves behind her, arranged not by colour, but by memory. She could tell them apart by feel, by the scent of dye, by the way each one responded to the light. A spindle rested nearby, its whirl carved with the image of a songbird. Outside, the leaves rustled in a quiet breeze. The chickens in the yard clucked softly, pecking at scattered feed. A cat lounged in a patch of sun beneath the open shutter, one paw flicking now and then in a dream. Elswith's loom sang its soft song, a tune of patience and texture. As the hours passed, the cloth grew longer, rich in colour, strong in weave. It would be used for tunics, for hoods, perhaps for a new tabard if the village reeve requested one. Occasionally, a neighbour would stop by with spun wool to trade, or simply to sit and share a few quiet words. Voices in the weaving shed were always gentle, always brief. The air itself seemed to ask for calm. A pot of water warmed near the hearth for dyeing, beside a bowl of crushed woad and another of madder root. Their earthy smells mingled with the wool and wood, creating a scent that felt older than words. As the light shifted and shadows stretched longer across the floor, Elswaith tied off her thread and smoothed the fabric with a practiced hand. She stretched, stood slowly, and poured a bit of water for the cat. The loom stood ready for the next day. Its threads would wait, quiet and unmoving, until her fingers returned to coax them once more into shape. In the weaver's shed, nothing was hurried, nothing was wasted. Everything moved according to a rhythm as old as the land itself. Beyond the hedgerows and over a gentle hill, the village meadow opened wide under the afternoon sun. It rolled out like a soft green sea, dotted with low shrubs and wildflowers that nodded quietly in the breeze. The grass was thick and cool beneath bare feet, and here and there, the hum of bees wove through the air like threads in a tapestry. A small flock of sheep grazed slowly near the far edge, their wool thick and pale, their heads down as they moved in gentle grazing rhythms. Among them walked Osric, the village shepherd, his staff resting lightly in one hand, a small leather pouch tied at his side. His cloak flapped gently in the wind, and his boots left shallow prints in the damp earth. He moved without hurry, watching the animals with calm, thoughtful eyes. A dog trotted beside him, alert but silent, its tail swaying like a reed. Together they circled the flock now and then, nudging a stray back toward the group or watching the horizon for movement. The sun warmed Osric's shoulders as he sat on a flat stone near the brook that wound along the edge of the meadow. He pulled an apple from his pouch, turned it slowly in his hand, then took a bite. It crunched softly, its juice fresh and tart. He watched a pair of crows soar above the trees, their shadows sliding over the grass. By the water, A small deer appeared briefly, pausing to drink before vanishing once more into the woods. The sheep continued to graze, undisturbed. Their bells chimed softly, a soothing sound that echoed lightly in the open space. Osric leaned back on his elbows, letting the breeze drift over him. He listened to the buzz of insects, the murmur of the stream, and the low, comforting bleat of a lamb nearby. He did not speak. He rarely did while in the meadow. There was no need for words here. He pulled a carving knife from his pouch and a bit of wood. Slowly, without thinking, he began to shape it, perhaps into a bird, or a sheep, or simply something smooth to pass between his fingers. Chips of wood fell softly to the ground. As the sun began to dip, its light turned golden and long. The shadows of the sheep stretched toward the brook, and the coolness of evening crept softly across the field. Osric stood, whistled once, and the dog perked up. Together, they guided the flock back toward the village, their pace unhurried. The meadow fell silent once more. Only the stream remained, trickling through stones worn smooth by time. Above it, the last bees drifted back to their hives, and the light faded gently from green to gold to blue. At the highest point in the village, just beyond the far end of the green, stood an ancient oak tree. Its trunk was thick and gnarled, its roots spreading wide beneath the earth like quiet veins. Around it grew soft grass and clumps of wild mint, and nearby, set upon a low wooden frame, hung the village's simple bell. It was not large nor grand. Its iron was dark and weathered, its rope worn smooth by years of use. But it rang true, clear and low, calling not just to prayer, but to gathering, to news, to moments when the village paused together. Just before evening, the bell would chime once, a slow, deep tone that rolled gently down the lanes, through doorways, and across the open fields. It was the sound that told the people the day was nearing its end. Today, it was Oswin who came to ring it. A young man with quiet eyes and a thoughtful manner. He climbed the short rise with a steady step. He paused beneath the oak, laying a hand on its bark, rough and warm in the setting sun. A squirrel darted overhead, vanishing into the branches, and a breeze stirred the leaves with a sound like whispered rain. Oswin took the rope and gave it a single, long pull. The bell swung once, its sound low and soft, like the voice of the land itself. Then he let it hang still again, swaying gently in the cooling air. The sound drifted across the village. In the weaving shed, Mistress Elsweeth looked up and smiled faintly. At the bakery, Ralph checked the final loaf and set it near the window to cool. In the meadow, the last sheep were turned toward their pens. And in the cottages, small fires were lit, their smoke rising straight into the quiet sky. Oswin stayed a while beneath the oak, sitting on one of the roots that rose like a seat from the ground. He watched the clouds shift in colour from white to gold to lavender. Birds circled lazily overhead, then disappeared into the hedgerows. The bell, now still, caught the last of the sun's light. It glinted faintly, a quiet guardian above the roofs and fields. And the oak, older than memory, stood silent beside it, watching as it always had. When Oswin finally rose to leave, the shadows had grown long. He walked slowly back down the hill, past the wild mint and the bell's frame, his footsteps soft in the grass. Behind him, the village slipped quietly into evening, its edges wrapped in hush and firelight. The bell had spoken. The day was closing, gently and well. As the sun dipped behind the distant trees, a golden hush settled over the village. Cottages glowed from within. their windows casting soft light onto the paths and garden beds. Thin wisps of smoke rose from chimneys, curling gently into the lavender sky. The smell of warm broth, fresh bread and wood smoke filled the air. Inside a small, tidy cottage near the stream, a family gathered around the hearth. The fire crackled softly, its orange light flickering across the stone floor and wooden walls. Iron pots hung from hooks above the flames, gently bubbling with the evening stew, leeks, carrots, a bit of barley, and a pinch of rosemary. The scent was both humble and rich, the kind of comfort that lingered long after the meal had ended. The mother ladled portions into clay bowls, her hands steady, her face flushed from the heat. She passed them carefully to the children, who sat cross-legged on woven mats, their eyes drowsy but content. The father poured cider into 2 small cups and set them by the hearth. No one spoke much. The room was filled instead with the quiet sounds of spoon against bowl, the soft rustle of cloth, the gentle sigh of logs settling deeper into the fire. Occasionally, someone would smile or hum, and the children would murmur to one another as they dipped their bread into the broth. On a low shelf above the hearth stood a few treasured items: a carved wooden bowl from the grandfather's time, a dried posy tied with twine, and a beeswax candle nearly burned to the base. Beside it, a cat slept curled in a basket, its fur rising and falling in a slow rhythm. After supper, the children helped tidy. Bowls were rinsed in a bucket of warm water and set carefully on the table to dry. A broom swept the crumbs from the floor. Then they returned to the fire, where the warmth was deepest and the light kindest. The father picked up a small harp and plucked a few quiet notes. The sound drifted gently into the room, soft as a lullaby. The mother leaned back against the wall, eyes half closed, her hand resting on her daughter's shoulder. The fire dimmed slowly, its glow turning from orange to red, then settling into embers. Outside, the village was quiet. Only the occasional call of a night bird or the soft creak of timber broke the silence. The stream whispered nearby, its voice unchanged by day or dark. And within the cottage, wrapped in warmth and stillness, the family settled into the calm that came only at day's end. Not with noise or excitement, but with the deep, slow peace of shared bread, flickering light, and stories left unspoken. Tucked beside a narrow footpath, where wildflowers brushed against the ankles and the air held the scent of beeswax and lavender, stood the candlemaker's shed. It was a quiet place, low-roofed and timbered, half covered in ivy that fluttered softly in the evening breeze. A small lantern swung gently by the door, casting soft shadows on the mossy stones below. Inside, the world felt still. The walls were lined with wooden shelves holding rows of tallow candles, beeswax tapers and small pots of fragrant oil. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the beams, and a shallow bowl of lavender buds sat on the table beside a pot of warm wax. Mistress Annette stood near the hearth, slowly dipping wicks into a pot of golden beeswax. Her movements were unhurried, almost like a dance. Dip, lift, turn, hang. The smell of the wax was sweet and earthy, rising with the steam in soft curls. A small window near the roof let in the last light of day, touching her silver-streaked hair with a quiet glow. The room was warm, filled with the soft hiss of wax, the creak of old wood, and the faint ticking of a clock carved from a single piece of walnut. In the corner, a young apprentice stirred a second pot of tallow, careful to keep the flame low. She yawned as she worked, the slow rhythm of the task gently lulling her towards sleep. On the work table lay finished candles their wicks trimmed, their shape simple and perfect. Some were shaped for lanterns, others for the chapel, and a few small ones tied with twine for household use. Each one held a purpose, a place it would glow, quietly lighting another room in the village. Mistress Annette hummed softly as she worked, her tune as steady as her hands. Outside, a nightingale began its song, the notes drifting through the open shutter and blending with the warmth of the shed. The world outside was darkening, but inside the light was soft and golden, cradling every corner of the space. As the last candle was dipped and hung to cool, the apprentice began to tidy the table. Tools were wiped clean, bits of wax gathered in a wooden box for reuse. The hearth fire was banked, its glow softening into deep amber. Before leaving, Mistress Annette lit a single taper and placed it on the sill. It flickered gently in the breeze, a tiny flame holding the night at bay. She stood a moment longer, watching it burn, then turned and stepped out into the cool air. The shed fell silent behind her, filled with the faint scent of beeswax and herbs and the presence of work done well. In the village below, candles glowed in windows, their soft flames keeping watch through the quiet night. At the western edge of the village stood a small stone chapel, simple and square, with a wooden door worn smooth by many hands. Vines climbed its outer wall, and moss softened the stones where sun rarely reached. A single bell hung in the wooden frame above the entrance, quiet now, its rope coiled neatly beside the door. Inside, the chapel was dim, lit only by the warm flicker of a few beeswax candles. Their flames shimmered gently, casting dancing shadows across the walls and illuminating the carved wooden figures that lined the altar. The scent was of old wood, melted wax, and the faint trace of incense still lingering from the morning prayer. The benches were rough-hewn, their surfaces polished by generations of quiet sitting. A woven rush mat covered the centre aisle, its scent fresh and grassy. Near the altar, a wooden stool held a small book, its pages smoothed by time and use. No one read from it now, but it rested open, as if waiting. Brother Aldwin, the chapel's keeper, moved quietly from candle to candle, trimming the wicks and straightening the holders. He worked slowly, each motion deliberate, as if he were brushing dust from a beloved relic. He paused often, looking around the space, not checking, but listening. Outside, the last birds were settling in the hedgerows. A breeze passed through the cracks in the chapel walls, stirring the candlelight. The silence within was deep, yet full, a silence that held every footstep, every whispered prayer, every breath taken in stillness. At the back of the chapel, a wooden box sat beneath a small carved cross. Villagers would place folded bits of parchment there, prayers written in trembling hands, hopes and sorrows offered in quiet. Brother Aldwin did not read them, but he held them close in his own prayers, letting them rest like stones at the bottom of a gentle stream. The sun dipped further. Its final light touched the chapel window, coloured by the faintest stain of red and blue glass. The image was simple: a sheep, a shepherd, and stars. The light filtered through it, falling onto the stone floor in soft, fading colour. Brother Aldwin knelt for a moment near the altar, his head bowed, the candlelight painting his robe in gold. He whispered a few quiet words, then stood, folded the rush mat, and placed it gently beside the door. As he stepped outside, the chapel fell into near darkness. Only the candles remained, their light small but steady. The door closed behind him with a muted click, and within those stone walls, peace lingered. Not the loud, triumphant kind, but the soft peace of nightfall, of devotion, of a place made sacred by silence and by care. As the last traces of daylight faded from the sky, the village began to glow with the gentle light of lanterns. Small oil lamps hung from doorposts and windows, their flames swaying within glass and horn. Paths that had been shadowed, and still during the day, now shimmered softly in pools of gold and amber. Children walked with their parents, holding little lanterns made from hollowed turnips or crafted from thin, painted parchment. The flames inside flickered with each step, sending faint shadows skipping across the hedges and fences. Their footsteps were light, their voices hushed, as if they understood that the village was now entering its most tender hour. Mist settled gently in the low places between cottages and trees, and the grass, still warm from the sun, gave off the scent of earth and evening. A pair of owls called to each other across the rooftops. Somewhere, a dog barked once, then went quiet again. Old Meg, who lived nearest the woods, stood outside her door with a lantern in one hand and a shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She nodded to those who passed, her face lit by the soft glow. A few stopped to speak with her, their words short and kind, wrapped in the hush of night. Along the stream, the mill window shone faintly, and a lantern had been placed on a stump beside the door. Its flame reflected in the dark water, like a second moon bobbing gently with the current. A frog croaked from the bank, its voice low and contented. The blacksmith's forge, quiet now, held a single lamp on its outer wall. It burned steadily, marking the place where sparks had flown and iron had sung earlier that day. Now, only warmth remained, trapped in stone and ember. The lanterns were not for work, nor for warning. They were for guidance, for presence, for the comfort of knowing that even in the dark, the village held together, each small flame a sign of care and company. Brother Aldwin, on his way back from the chapel, carried a lantern of his own. The glass was clouded, the metal frame simple, but the light it cast was warm and sure. He moved slowly, nodding to those he passed, pausing once to relight a neighbour's lamp that had gone out in the wind. When he reached his cottage, he set the lantern in the window and sat beside it, watching the last villagers make their way home. The night deepened. The stars emerged, clear and cold above the rooftops. The lanterns, one by one, began to flicker and go out. But for now, they glowed, each a small sun in the dark, and the village, wrapped in their quiet light, breathed slowly, peacefully, as the world drifted into sleep. Near the base of the old elm tree at the edge of the green, there was a stone bench shaped by time and softened by moss. On warmer evenings, once the lanterns were lit and the animals penned for the night, villagers would gather here, not for tasks or chores, but for stories. Old Tom, with his cane and creased smile, was the storyteller. He came from a cottage with a low roof and a door that never quite latched. Wrapped in a patched wool cloak and holding a cup of spiced cider, he would lower himself onto the bench, clearing his throat softly before beginning. Tonight, the air was calm. No wind stirred the leaves, and the sky glowed faintly with starlight. A few children sat cross-legged in the grass, their eyes wide, their chins tucked into their sleeves. The grown folk stood behind them, quiet, arms folded, listening. Tom's voice was soft, barely louder than the hum of the crickets nearby. He spoke of a fox with silver fur that lived at the edge of the wood, who stole eggs not from greed, but to hatch and raise a family of birds abandoned in spring. He told of a baker who once dreamt she could speak to the moon, and woke to find her oven always warm, even when unlit. His stories were not grand or wild. They were small, wrapped in kindness and wonder. Tales where lost things were always found, and no journey ended without something gentle to return to. Each pause he took allowed the stillness to settle deeper, like a warm blanket drawn close. Someone passed him a bit of bread, and he broke it slowly, sharing half with a boy beside him. A candle flickered in a jar near his feet, lighting his face in golden shadow. The light danced as he spoke of a willow tree that whispered secrets to those who waited long enough to hear. Around him, the village held its breath, not from suspense, but from peace. Even the dogs lay still, heads resting on paws. Somewhere beyond the fields, an owl called once, then fell silent again. As the story ended, there was no applause, no clapping, only a soft exhale from the crowd. A quiet thank you, a few nods, and the slow rustle of people rising to return home. Tom smiled, eyes crinkling, and leaned back against the tree as the children waved goodnight. The candle burned lower, the bench emptied. The elm tree, ancient and steady, listened as always. And the village, wrapped once more in quiet, carried the warmth of stories like embers beneath the skin, glowing softly as sleep approached. Down a narrow side lane paved with uneven stones, beside a small plot of cabbages and a fence grown through with honeysuckle, stood the cobbler's shop. It was little more than a single room, with a sloped roof and a lantern hanging above the door, its flame flickering gently in the stillness of night. Inside, the air was filled with the scent of leather and beeswax polish, warm and comforting. Rows of wooden lasts stood along the shelves, shaped by many feet over many years. Boots and shoes, some newly stitched, others lovingly patched, waited patiently on hooks and tables. Master Harlan, the cobbler, sat on a low stool beneath a hanging oil lamp, his spectacles perched at the end of his nose, catching the light as he leaned over his work. In his hands, a soft leather slipper, the sole nearly worn through. With quiet care, he pressed a fresh piece into place, smoothing it with a warm iron. His tools were laid out with quiet precision, awl, hammer, waxed thread, knife, each one worn smooth by use, each with a story of its own. The only sounds were the soft scrape of leather, the rhythmic tap of the hammer, and the slow creak of the old stool as he shifted his weight. Outside, the village had long since gone quiet. A breeze passed through the honeysuckle, stirring its blossoms. A moth bumped gently against the window pane, drawn to the soft glow within. Master Harlan worked slowly. There was no need for speed. The slipper would be finished by morning, ready for the baker's daughter to wear through the coming winter. Her last pair had lasted 2 years. He remembered her feet, small, always cold. He had lined these with wool. He paused to sip from a mug of warm cider, its steam curling into the lamplight. His eyes drifted to the shelf where a pair of his own father's boots still stood. He never wore them anymore, but he kept them clean, their leather oiled and supple. In a quiet drawer, scraps of suede and bits of ribbon were tucked away for repairs or little gifts. A pouch for a child, a lacing for an old man's boot. Every piece had a place, and every piece would someday be used. As the hour grew late, Master Harlan leaned back and looked over his work. The slipper was finished. He ran his thumb along the seam, nodded once, and set it beside its pair near the door. He blew out the lamp, but left the lantern outside burning, its glow a soft invitation to any passing night creature. The cobbler's shop, with its scent of leather and warm wood, slipped into darkness. And outside, beneath the stars, the village rested. Every foot that had walked its paths, every shoe and boot and slipper, had passed through this little room. A place of quiet work, of humble craft, of care wrapped in stitches and thread. At the edge of the village, beyond the last garden plot and a winding fence made of twisted hazelwood, stood the barn. Its doors were wide and worn, its roof heavy with thatch, and its beams strong with the scent of hay and thyme. As the night deepened, the barn settled into stillness, holding the warmth of the day in its thick wooden bones. Inside, the animals lay in their stalls, their breathing deep and slow. The oxen dozed with their heads tucked into the straw, tails twitching gently with dreams. The goats lay curled against each other, soft murmurs rising now and then as they shifted in their sleep. A hen fluttered softly in her roost, her feathers rustling like pages turned in a book. Above, in the loft, bales of hay were stacked neatly, the smell sweet and dry. A lantern hung from a beam, its light dimmed but still glowing, casting golden shadows across the floor. Mice moved softly through the hay, gathering seeds, their tiny paws almost silent. Young Edric, the stable boy, had finished his rounds an hour before. He had checked each latch, stroked each muzzle, and whispered a quiet goodnight to every animal. Now he sat just inside the door on a pile of sacks, his eyes half closed, listening to the barn's deep silence. A soft wind moved through the cracks in the wall, carrying with it the scent of meadow and cool soil. Outside, the moon rose slowly, its pale light slipping between the slats and painting long stripes across the dusty floor. The horses shifted gently in their stalls, hooves thudding once, then still. Their breath steamed in the cool night, and the sound of it, slow and steady, matched the rhythm of Edric's own. The barn was never completely dark. Even in the blackest night, a faint glow lingered. Moonlight through knotholes, the memory of the lantern's light, the warmth of so many living creatures resting in peace. Edric yawned and tucked his cloak tighter around him. He would stay just a little longer to be sure all was well. Not from duty, but from something deeper. A love for the quiet hum of life, the way the barn held everything safe. And outside, the village slept. A barn door creaked faintly, then fell still. And in the hush that followed, the world turned gently, wrapped in straw and stars. The village stream, narrow and clear, flowed gently through the lowlands just beyond the last cottage. By day, it whispered through reeds and over stones, winding past the mill and the garden walls. By night, it moved even softer, its ripples laced with starlight and silence. Moonlight shimmered across its surface, broken only by the dip of a water vole or the soft brush of a drifting leaf. The water, cool and patient, reflected the sky above, stars scattered like grains across black silk. Tiny fish slept beneath stones, their bodies still in the quiet current. A narrow footbridge arched over the stream, its planks smooth from years of footsteps. Tonight, it stood empty, catching the glow of the moon in faint silver streaks. The air here was colder, touched by the cool breath of the water. Wild mint grew along the bank, its scent rising faintly whenever a breeze stirred. Brother Aldwyn passed this way, his lantern casting a soft orb of light ahead of him. He paused on the bridge, listening to the night sounds, the soft chuckle of the stream, the gentle rustle of tall grass, the faint hoot of an owl perched somewhere unseen. He set the lantern on the railing and leaned both hands against the wood, looking down. The water moved steadily, untroubled. A frog sang once, then went quiet. The reeds swayed in rhythm with the stream's hush, as if listening. For a long while he simply stood there, breathing in the damp air, watching the stars drift slowly across the mirrored sky. Time, in this place, moved differently. Not in hours or minutes, but in heartbeats and shadows. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small scrap of paper. A child in the village had handed it to him earlier. A simple prayer, written with care. He folded it gently and tucked it between the slats of the bridge, just as he had done many nights before. Not to be read, but to be left, given over to the stream and the stars. Then, lifting the lantern, he turned and walked slowly back along the path. The grass brushed against his robes, and the light bobbed gently with each step. Behind him, the stream continued on, unhurried, unchanged, a thread of silver stitching through the night, holding the quiet world in its steady flow, and the stars above, reflected below, kept their silent watch over the sleeping land. In the final hour of the night, before even the first hint of dawn touched the sky, the village lay beneath a blanket of perfect stillness. Every lantern had gone dark. Every hearth had burned low. Only the soft glow of fading embers lit the cottages from within, their warmth stretching just far enough to touch the stones and the soles of resting feet. In one such cottage, the fire had become a quiet cradle of light. The logs had collapsed into ash, glowing red beneath a veil of grey. A single candle flickered on the table, its flame bobbing gently as it reached the end of its wick. The air was warm with the scent of wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of dried thyme hung above the door. The family within slept soundly. The father's boots rested neatly beside the door. The mother's hands, folded on a quilt she had mended earlier, were still. The children curled together on their straw-filled mattress, cheeks flushed with the gentle warmth of sleep. Even the dog at the foot of the bed did not stir, its ears twitching only now and then at the far-off cry of an owl. Outside, the wind had quieted. Trees stood motionless in the dark, and the well in the centre of the green reflected the stars as clearly as if they had fallen in. Frost crept silently along the edges of windows, leaving feathery patterns that caught the candle's last light. Within the chapel, the final taper burned low before the altar. The stone floor held the memory of footsteps now long past. In the barn, the animals slept deeply. In the orchard, the branches were still. And in every space of the village, from weaver's loom to blacksmith's forge, from bell tower to cloister of trees, the world rested. This was the hour of true peace. Not the quiet before work, nor the hush of prayer, but the deep shared stillness that only comes when every breath aligns. A village asleep, not in fear or haste, but in the full trust of another day complete. And soon the cockerel would call, the baker's fire would stir, the sheep would bleat softly in the mist, but for now, only dreams drifted through the roofs and rafters, soft as smoke, slow as snow. The village slept, wrapped in warmth and night, its heartbeat steady, its stories safe. Thanks for watching this far. I truly appreciate you more than you know. If you like this story, please like and subscribe.